The idea of organizing and holding a pseudo-referendum in the temporary occupied territories is not new.
Ukraine is not organizing any referendum now and is not allowed to do so under the current constitution.
Ми в непростій ситуації, тому що маємо справу з тим, на що не можемо впливати.
Слова «вільне волевиявлення» є ключовими у цьому контексті.
Hello and welcome to Ukrainian Flames, a special project by Ukraine Media Center and Euro-Atlantic Course NGO. My name is Alisa, and today we'll talk about Russia's pseudo-referendum in temporarily occupied territories. If you want to know more, please subscribe to our channel to stay tuned. Russia intends to announce the holding of referendums in the occupied territories of Ukraine. This would mean that the Kremlin continues its imperialist policy. Pseudo-referendums in the occupied territories will not be recognized by Ukraine and other world countries and will complicate possible negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine's President Zelensky assured. Vice Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk noted that participation in pseudo-referendums is punishable by imprisonment for up to 12 years. We've talked about the challenges and consequences of pseudo-referendum with Olha Aivazovska.
The idea of organizing and holding a pseudo-referendum in the temporary occupied territories is not new. It has been announced by Russians over and over again for a long time. The first attempts at preparation were visible in the spring of 2022. For reasons incomprehensible to the Ukrainians, the Russians decided they would not face significant resistance from the Ukrainian army and the civilian population. Of course, they are implementing any simulated form of people's rule that require a picture with widespread support evidence. It had nothing to do with the reality. The Ukrainian authorities said that the pseudo-referendum would be an obstacle to future negotiations with the Russians. This is a logical statement since after the fake referendum, the process of annexation will take place, making any diplomatic way impossible even after the stabilization of the front line. At the same time, one of the good reasons why the fake vote has not yet taken place is the active action of the armed forces of Ukraine, local counter-offensives on some regions of the front, and insufficient but permanent supply of weapons to Ukraine from our Western partners. The Kremlin's preparation for a pseudo-referendum on the temporary occupied territories in the south and east of Ukraine poses considerable short and long-term risk and represents a serious escalation of Russian aggression. At the moment, Russia appears intent to repeat the Crimea scenario for a full-fledged annexation instead of establishing a Russian-controlled pseudo-states as it did in the parts of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. When Russia occupied Ukrainian Crimea in 2014, the West offered a weak response to the most significant European territorial integrity violence since World War II. At the same time, international institutions confined themselves to public statement of concern, which led to a de facto exception of the Russian annexation. In the short term, annexation would allow the Kremlin to militarize occupied areas of Ukraine and use capture population as the cannon fodder in the war against their fellow Ukrainians. Large numbers of the civilian population would be forcibly deported to the most far-flung region of Russia, while Russians would be encouraged to replace them and settle in Ukraine. The Kremlin would also exploit rich pseudo-referendums to extend its nuclear umbrella to newly annexed regions of Ukraine under the guise of defending Russia's territorial integrity. Moscow would then use the cynical argument to pressure the West into discouraging Ukraine from undertaking further military action to liberate southern and eastern Ukraine. Therefore, today it is critical for Ukraine to obtain enough weapons to liberate the territories, protect the civilian population, and prevent annexation. Although there have already been statements by Russians about the postponement of the fake referendum in the Kherson region from September to October, it is essential to understand that this is not the end of the story. This is a high risk that the fake vote will be conducted to visit citizens from apartment to apartment for a week and a half, and those still at home will be forced to vote. These have been no honest elections and democracy in Russia for a long time. So voting can become a form of pressure, a way to filtrate civilians and a means of electing personal data. According to Ukrainian legislation, citizens who remain in the occupied territories should be aware that their participation in organizing a fake referendum will be recognized as a crime. It is clear that it is essential to analyze and prospectively investigate each fact separately, but everyone who can avoid complicity in the referendum should do so consciously. It is the responsibility of the state at this time to do everything possible so that the occupation is short-term and the annexation becomes impossible due to the objective actions of our armed forces with the support of our partners.
Alisa Shushkovska disclosed legal aspects of the situation.
They will have no legal consequences regardless of how they are administered. I would like to refer to the international law and some basic international standards in this regard. First and foremost, the Charter of the United Nations clearly forbids the use of force by one state against another state, and this is the charter which was co-signed by most states in the world, including the Russian Federation. By that time, the Soviet Republic. The 1949 Geneva Convention on Protection of Civilians and its official commentaries say that the fact of occupation cannot bear any rights on the territory in question. The occupation is defined as a temporary situation in wartime which deprives the territory in question of its own statehood. So there can't be any claiming of the rights on the territory in question by the fact of the occupation itself. So all activities in regards to organization of pseudo-referendum by one state on the territory of another sovereign state do not have any legal consequences and are considered by the international community as null and void. In 1991, the independence of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders was recognized by the world. It happened after the all-Ukrainian referendum, which approved the Declaration of Independence adopted by the parliament earlier that year. Ukraine received assurances of respect to its territorial integrity by a number of documents, starting from the United Nations commitments, by the OSCE commitments, which Olha mentioned, to the Budapest Memorandum, which is, however, now severely criticized for the lack of enforcement mechanism. But nevertheless, this was a document which was signed, international treaty, which was signed by the parties, and this was grossly violated by one of the security assurance providers, which is the Russian Federation. Talking about the referendum as such and rules for holding it, there are universal principles and international standards in that, and any referendum must be organized according to these internationally recognized standards to be called a referendum. There is a guiding document which is called the Code of Good Practice of the Venice Commission, the Council of Europe's Venice Commission. Any referendum must be based on the principle of free suffrage, where voters can freely form their opinion. There always must be full respect to human rights. There must be a full freedom of freedom of expression, of association, assemblies. Authorities must provide objective information about the event. There must not be one-sided campaigning. It's strictly forbidden. Last but not least, the safety and security of the whole process must be ensured at all stages. But again, there is no need to dwell on these principles further, because the event, the sham event, which is planned by the Russian Federation on the territory of Ukraine, does not fall under the universally accepted understanding of referendum. It is fully devoid of any characteristics pertaining to the referendum, and it cannot be called as such. Talking about the principle of self-determination, which Russia is using in a manipulative way to defend and to justify their intervention, self-determination and protection of Russian population living in the occupied territories, I would like to stress that this is mispresented and it is misunderstood by them and used in the wrong context, because the Venice Commission says clearly that the self-determination is an internal thing within existing borders and cannot be considered as external self-determination through succession. On the opposite, most member states of the Council of Europe, they clearly forbid the succession of the territory in their constitutions, which is the case for Ukraine as well. It might be obvious, but still needs to be reminded that organization of referendum, elections, or any other democracy event is the sole discretion of independent state. And the state organizes it according to the constitutional framework it has, according to own legal system and political system. The referendum or any other democracy events are administered or guided by the legally mandated election management body, which in Ukraine is the Central Election Commission. The country always involves observers, international and national, to certify the accuracy, to certify the legitimacy of the process and the outcomes. And this is not the case here because Ukraine is not organizing any referendum now and is not allowed to do so under the current constitution. As I was already told, the constitution of Ukraine clearly says that the territory of Ukraine is inviolable, it's integral, and no successions are possible. Yes, all the changes to the territory can be decided by the national referendum, but it is not applicable to succession of the territories. It is just not allowed by the constitution, and constitution itself protects against the changes which would allow any changes to the territorial integrity of Ukraine. I would also like to stress that the code of good practice I was referring to clearly says that only those referenda which are provided for by the constitution and its legal system are allowed. Those which are not allowed by the constitution or the laws of the country where it is held, they are not allowed and they are not a referendum.
Oleh Didenko presented the position of Ukraine's Central Electoral Commission on the situation.
Ми в непростій ситуації, тому що маємо справу з тим, на що не можемо впливати. І по великому рахунку важко говорити, які висновки мала б зробити Центральна виборча комісія з референдумів 2014 року, тому що ці дії відбувалися не з боку не зі сторони української влади чи Центральної виборчої комісії, як тоді, так і зараз. Найбільша проблема в тому, що держава Україна чи Центральна виборча комісія чи інший рівень виборчої комісії не можуть впливати на ту територію, де немає нашого контролю, де не можуть функціонувати органи влади. І найбільший урок, я про це говорив, це ми потребуємо консолідації всього світу, тому що це не питання виключно України. Це питання світового порядку, це питання, наскільки на такі дії реагує світова спільнота, наскільки вона об'єднана, консолідована, наскільки вона може засудити і вжити інших заходів щодо недопущення подібних дій в майбутньому. Тому що в нашому випадку йдеться не про якісь конкретні організаційні заходи, які ми могли б вчинити, чи не вчинити.
Svitlana Kononchuk presented her own vision of the pseudoreferendum issue.
Коли ми говоримо про референдум як такий, ми повинні перш за все оцінити його з точки зору можливості вільного волевиявлення. Слова «вільне волевиявлення» є ключовими у цьому контексті. Між тим, ситуація в тимчасово окупованих землях України дуже далека від того, аби пройти тест на забезпечення громадянських свобод, які є передумовою для реалізації політичних прав. На сьогоднішній день ні свобода вираження поглядів, ні свобода мирних зібрань, ні свобода об'єднання людей в будь-якій асоціації не реалізується. Ми всі чуємо про погрози, про залякування, про побиття, про викрадення і про вбивства дуже багатьох людей, які насмілилися мати інші погляди, аніж ті погляди, які нав'язуються силою окупаційною владою. Ніякого ідейного плюралізму, ніякої вільної діяльності політичних партій, ніякої можливості для роботи громадських об'єднань, профспілок, вільних ЗМІ на тимчасово окупованих територіях немає. І, звичайно, в умовах воєнного стану, з одного боку, який є правовим оформленням ситуації, що склалася, і в умовах терору, який чинить окупаційна влада щодо мешканців тих територій, які вона окупувала, говорити про вільне волевиявлення, про вибори, про референдуми взагалі немає жодних підстав.
You've been watching the special project by Ukraine Media Center and Euro-Atlantic course dedicated to Russia-Ukraine war, Ukraine in Flames. In description there is also information how personally you can help Ukraine against Russian aggression. If you find our job useful, please like and share this video. Everything is gonna be Ukraine.